I make a good living, so I could afford the best education for my son. Honestly, Mia, we're on a different level. My son, after all, is not only good-looking but also a genius. That's right. Our son takes after his father, Bright, graduated from a top university, and now he's working at a promising tech company that everyone's talking about. I'm truly blessed to have a high-earning husband and an accomplished son. But look at you working in a place like this, and still single. How sad. Every time I meet this obnoxious couple, Matthew and Tina, they boast endlessly about themselves. I've had enough. Matthew even suggested we all go out to dinner because he wanted me to meet their son. As much as I wanted to get away from them, I saw an opportunity. So I responded with a bright smile. If that's the case, I'd be delighted. This is the perfect chance. So I'll introduce you to my son as well. That was the moment their son, Christopher, walked in, and my son, Zane, said something that made Matthew and Tina tremble. These two always acted high and mighty toward me, but little by little, their true selves started to show. My name is Mia. I'm 53 years old, a working mom with a son. I lost my parents when I was young, and then I got married at 25. My husband was a coworker, 3 years older than me, named Matthew. Matthew started to develop feelings for me as he watched me work diligently in the accounting department. He would invite me to meals during breaks, and we would walk home together after work. Eventually, we started dating. In my second year at the company, he proposed, and we got married. Matthew's family lived far away, so I first met my parents-in-law right before the wedding. But both Matthew and his parents seemed distant and hardly spoke to each other. I wondered if their relationship was strained. However, my parents-in-law were polite to me, and, though they were quiet, they kindly greeted me, saying, "Please take good care of our son." The wedding wasn't a big affair, but we invited our bosses from work and friends from school. Everyone celebrated with us, especially my best friend, Tina, who was as happy as if it were her own wedding. She held Matthew's hand, saying, "Take care of Mia," with tears in her eyes. Matthew smiled sheepishly at that. And so the wedding ended, and our life as newlyweds began. I planned to keep working until we had kids, so I continued my job as usual. However, for 3 years after our marriage, we didn't have any children. It started to bother me about a year after we got married. Matthew, who had said he wanted kids right away, seemed more distant recently. I tried hard to conceive, but nothing seemed to work. We both went through fertility tests, but there wasn't anything wrong with either of us. I even thought about quitting my job to focus more on trying to conceive. But just as I was about to bring it up to Matthew, something happened. Matthew, who would always be home by 9 p.m. at the latest, started coming home until the middle of the night, and on weekends, he'd just go out without saying anything. I couldn't help but think he was dissatisfied because we couldn't have children. But if that were the case, I felt we needed to talk about it as a couple. I searched for a moment when he was at home and asked him why he rarely stays at home. "Matthew, you've been going out a lot lately on your own. Is it because we don't have kids? Do you find it boring to be just with me?" "No, not really." That's all he said, in a cold, dismissive way, before leaving again. I made up my mind to quit my job and handed in my resignation. But quitting work didn't fix anything. I wondered if I should talk to someone I trust. Just then, I got a call. "Hey, Mia. Long time no talk." "Oh, Tina. It's been a while." It was my best friend, Tina. She was the one who was the happiest for me at our wedding. Hearing her voice for the first time in a year made me feel nostalgic. "Have you been? How are things with Matthew?" I'm doing okay, I guess." I didn't want to dump my problems with Matthew on Tina right away, not after so long. But she must have sensed the change in my tone, and asked with concern, "What's going on? You don't sound like yourself. Are things not going well with Matthew?" "Well, yeah, kind of. I guess my feelings must have been coming through in my voice. Ever since her student life, Tina has always been quick to help when I'm in trouble. Tina got married before me, So I thought she might have some solid advice when it came to marriage. With that in mind, I told her about what had been going on with Matthew these past few months, and then Tina, in her usual upbeat tone, responded, "I haven't been able to have kids either, you know, but there's no need to rush. Sometimes, when it's just the two of you for a long time, men feel like they need to go out and get some space. But honestly, it's probably just a way for him to clear his head, so don't let it bother you too much, okay?" Is that really how it is? It's no surprise she was so calm about it. She got married before me, after all. Talking to Tina made me feel a lot better. Thanks, Tina. I'm glad I talked to you. Of course, whatever happens, just give me a call anytime, okay? I was so grateful to have such a dependable friend. But after that, Matthew's behavior only got stranger. He started not coming home for 2 or 3 days after going out on the weekends. And this happened more and more often, to the point where every weekend he was gone. Occasionally, I'd try calling Tina to talk, but she never picked up. She must have been busy. She didn't even return my calls. This went on for about 2 years. By the 3rd year of our marriage, my relationship with Matthew had become like a fake marriage, and I started thinking about divorce. I wished my parents were around in times like these. Loneliness took over, and I couldn't stop crying. I just wanted someone to listen to me, and that's when Tina called. "Tina, what's up? I've tried calling you a few times." "Oh, sorry about that. I've had a lot going on. Actually, I got divorced about a year ago. Moving and all that kept me super busy." "What? You got divorced?" I was stunned. I couldn't believe Tina had been going through a divorce. It didn't seem right to burden her with my problems, but something about the situation bothered me, so I asked her, "You were going through all that, but why didn't you say anything to me? You listened to all my troubles, but you never told me about your own." Tina was always the kind of person who'd listen to others' problems but was hesitant to show her own vulnerabilities, so I figured that's why she hadn't told me. But then, Tina's voice suddenly became serious as she responded, "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. Do you think we could meet up and have a proper conversation?" "What? Yeah, sure. I'm free whenever you are." This response was unexpected. Normally, Tina would say something like, "Don't worry about me." It made me think she must be going through something serious, so we arranged to meet on a day that worked for her. And then, on the day of our meeting, I went to the park where we agreed to meet. Tina was sitting on a bench, but she wasn't alone. Next to her, to my surprise, was Matthew. Come to think of it, Matthew hadn't been home for the last 3 days. But what was he doing with Tina? As I walked closer, Tina gave me a sly smile. It was a smug, almost victorious look. What was going on? I couldn't help but ask about Matthew first, as his presence was bothering me. "Tina, why are you here with Matthew?" "I thought we were going to talk about your ex-husband today." "My ex-husband? That's not important anymore. I have something to tell you about Matt." "What?" I couldn't understand what was happening. I was at a loss for words. Tina watched me flounder and broke into a loud, triumphant laugh, and then she said something unbelievable. "Ahahaha, you really are a careless person. After being neglected for 2 years, you didn't even notice your husband had a mistress." "What? What do you mean?" "Matt was bored with you, Mia. You were always so obsessed with not being able to have kids. That's why he came to me. We've been together for 2 years now." Tina said this as she linked arms with Matthew, who was sitting beside her. It hit me Tina worked at a company that did business with the one I used to work for. So she and Matthew were in contact because of work. "But Tina, didn't you say you got divorced a year ago?" "That's right. I got divorced because I was having an affair. And Matt paid all the settlement costs from the divorce trial. He did all that for me, so I don't want to leave him." Tina continued to speak, all the while clinging to Matthew's arm. I quickly turned my eyes away from Tina and looked at Matthew instead. I thought maybe he would show some remorse, but instead, he just looked at me and said, completely unashamed, "She's pregnant with my child. So can you let me go?" You and I didn't have kids for 3 years. It's just fate. Fate. Don't say something so selfish. The first year aside, it was you barely came home for the last 2 years. Anger welled up inside me, and I felt my fist start to shake. Tina, noticing my rage, raised her voice. Don't tell me you're refusing to divorce him. What about this baby? You couldn't have kids for 3 years, so just give it up and let him go. How could she say something so awful? Tina never used to be like this. I had thought about divorcing Matthew before, but not like this. Still, thinking about the baby Tina was carrying, maybe I had no choice but to step aside. So I had no choice but to hire a lawyer, file a claim for damages, and divorce him. Tina argued that since I didn't have children, getting a divorce wouldn't be a problem, and she refused to pay the damages. But I fought back and went to court, eventually getting them to pay a lump sum. Even with the money, I was left with a heavy heart. I had no parents, no siblings, and now I would be alone all over again. But then, 25 years later, after my divorce, I found a new job and eventually remarried a man who owned his own business. My husband is a wonderful person, and we were fortunate enough to have a child together. Now I'm living a happy life. Now that my child has grown up, I've used my experiences from when I was single and moved on to work in accounting at a different company. Just as I was finishing work today and getting ready to leave, something unexpected happened. Right in front of the building, I ran into a familiar face. It was Matthew and Tina. They walked toward me with smug smiles on their faces. I didn't want to see them, so I tried to look away and pretend I hadn't noticed. But Matthew forcefully grabbed my arm and immediately started hurling insults at me. Well, look who's working in this building. What a coincidence, our son works in the same building as you. But I bet your office is just some tiny company, huh? Unlike me, who makes a good living, I could afford the best education for my son. You and I are on a different level, Mia. My son is good-looking and a genius, after all. That's right. Our son takes after his father, so bright, graduated from a top university, and now he's working at a promising IT company. I'm truly blessed to have a high-earning husband and an accomplished son. But look at you working here and still single. How sad. I'm beyond fed up with this obnoxious couple and their endless bragging. Ignoring my desire to not interact with them, Matthew and Tina continued to push the conversation. Well, this is perfect timing. I was just about to meet my son for dinner after work. We're going to a French restaurant. Mia, why don't you come along? I can introduce you to my successful son. I'm sure you'd love to see how happy your ex-husband has become. Exactly. I'll tell you all about the brilliant son I had with the husband I took from you. Poor Miss Old Maid. Even though I wanted to be rid of these two, in a way, it was also the perfect opportunity for me. As they look at me with smug, self-satisfied grins, I responded with a bright smile. In that case, I'd be delighted. This is the perfect chance. So I'll introduce you to my son, too. What? While they were making confused sounds, a young man walked out of the building's door and called out to them. Dad, Mom, that conversation you were just having. Then, from behind him, my son, Zane, appeared. Oh, Mom, you're still here. What, sir? What did you just say? Did you just call that woman Mom? Matthew and Tina's voices began to tremble. Yes, Zane is the CEO of his own company. Actually, Zane started his own company while he was still in college, focusing on his skills in IT. At that time, I began helping with the accounting for Zane's company. Then, last spring, when Zane's company started to take off, we hired a young man who hadn't been able to find a job for a year after graduating from college. And that young man is the very person standing in front of me now, Christopher Garcia. Christopher definitely called Matthew and Tina Dad and Mom. Garcia is not an uncommon last name, so I never realized until now that he was my ex-husband's son. I can't hide my surprise. But why were Matthew and Tina trembling so much, especially while looking at Christopher? Christopher has been glaring at them with a very displeased expression since a moment ago. I could hear you from way over there, talking about your ex-husband, about stealing each of their spouses. What exactly happened between you two? What? You heard all of that? Tina asked in shock. But Christopher only sighed, looking disappointed. You were both talking so loudly that I could hear it all the way up in the building. I knew both of you had divorces before, but from what I heard, you had an affair and stole each other. So, am I a kid who was born from an affair? Christopher's eyes started to fill with tears as he spoke, staring at his parents, who had nothing to say back. Christopher is a good young man who works hard every day. Not at all like Matthew and Tina. I remembered that when he joined the company, he mentioned having to support his unemployed parents. So, Matthew isn't working now. I was suspicious, given all the things he was saying earlier. So I decided to confront him. Matthew, you've been acting all high and mighty. But what about your job? What happened to it? What? Oh, well, Matthew's eyes darted around nervously, like someone who had just been caught. Then, seeing his father's panicked state, Christopher spoke up in his place. My father was dismissed 2 years ago. I asked some of his colleagues, and they said his work attitude was poor, and apparently, he wasn't well liked by his boss. They didn't tell me the exact reason, but I'm guessing it had to do with some woman-related issues, right, Christopher? So when you mentioned you needed to support your parents, to my question, Christopher answered calmly. When he graduated from college, he didn't find a job right away because he hadn't found work that he was truly passionate about. He decided to work part-time and keep looking for a job that felt right. But shortly after his graduation, his father Matthew lost his job. Tina, who had stopped working to be a stay-at-home wife after marrying Matthew, wasn't working either. And the couple, who spent their time enjoying life, had almost no savings. Matthew, desperate for money, said to Christopher, "We paid for you to go through college, and now you're just working part-time instead of finding a real job. We supported you, so now it's your turn to find a job and support us. You owe us that much." Since then, Matthew made no effort to find work himself and pressured Christopher to take on a full-time job, no matter what. That's why Christopher had to scramble to find employment. It was then that he saw a job opening at Zane's company and thought it would be an ideal workplace, so he applied. And now, on his new higher salary, he's supporting his parents. So that's why Matthew and Tina were so shaken when they realized the mother of the CEO, Zane, was me. They were afraid the truth would come out to their son, afraid that they might be abandoned by him. Hearing Christopher's story, I realized I couldn't let this slide. I glared at Matthew and Tina and spoke sharply. Christopher is an earnest worker, and maybe you're proud of him as your son. But if you keep acting all high and mighty, depending on him without working yourselves, that's just unfair to Christopher. No, it's not like we're totally relying on him. Matthew just recently found some part-time work, and I'm thinking about working outside the home sometimes, too. But you and Dad spend whatever little money you have on lottery tickets and drinks. Neither of you knows how to manage money. And today, you made a reservation at a French restaurant, even though you're broke, just because my paycheck came through. So, going to the French restaurant was just for show. Matthew and Tina's faces flushed red with shame as they hung their heads, avoiding eye contact with me. I guess exposing the truth when they'd been putting on airs was humiliating. Just then, my husband, Alexander, who was waiting for me, approached us. "Hey, you were taking so long, I got worried." "Oh, I'm sorry. I just ran into some old acquaintances." You are." Matthew pointed at Alexander in shock, his face full of surprise. "Oh, Matthew, you know Alexander. Perfect timing. Let me reintroduce you. This is my husband, Alexander Prescott. He's the CEO of the company where I worked after my divorce. I know who the CEO is, but I never imagined Mia would be." Matthew's voice trailed off as he started to shrink back. Next to him, Tina nudged him with her elbow and asked, "What's wrong?" Matthew shook his head firmly at Tina and said, "Stop it. Mr. Prescott's company is on a whole different level than the one I worked for. There's no one in this area who doesn't know about it." What? How did Mia end up at such a prestigious company? And on top of that, she remarried the CEO. Both of them looked toward Zane. But why would the son of such a prominent CEO choose to start his own business instead of following in his father's footsteps? "Allow me to explain," Alexander said, beginning to share his thoughts on Zane. It's true that Alexander's company is one of the most well-known in the area. But Alexander had always wanted Zane to follow his own path. From the time Zane entered college, he had aimed to start a business with his friends. So as a parent, Alexander taught him the skills of being an entrepreneur and then let Zane take it from there. Zane was fortunate to have supportive friends and carefully laid out plans for his startup. And while he was still in college, he succeeded in founding his own company. After Alexander finished explaining, Christopher spoke to his parents. "When I saw the job opening, I researched this company. And I thought it was incredible that a CEO younger than me could achieve so much. That's why I wanted to work here to see how far I could go." Matthew and Tina must have felt more and more powerless with everything they heard. Despite all their talk, they were now being supported by their son while working only part-time. Looking closely, I could see that Matthew wanted to disappear out of shame. Sensing his parents' emotions, Christopher spoke to the slumped Matthew and Tina. "I'm not saying anything about how Dad and Mom rely on me now, but seeing Mom take someone else's husband, and the two of you looking down on that person, it's really disgraceful. I can't forgive you anymore." "Can't forgive us? What do you mean?" Tina asked in a fearful voice, clearly shaken. Since they were dependent on their son, they were terrified of what he might say. Christopher glared sharply at them and said firmly, "Honestly, I'm shocked. The fact that Dad and Mom had an affair, got married, and then had me. I don't want to be with parents like that anymore. So I'm leaving home to live on my own. From now on, you two can live your lives without me." Matthew and Tina's faces turned pale as Christopher declared his intentions. "No, we've relied on your income all this time. Please reconsider leaving." "That's right, Chris, you're all we have. Please don't say you're leaving us." The two knelt before Christopher, pleading with desperate eyes. But Christopher's expression remained unchanged, then apologized to the CEO's mother. "Not just to the CEO, I owe a lot to his mother as well. Honestly, she's more like a real mom to me than you are, Mom. If we apologize, will you forgive us?" Matthew grabbed Tina by the arm, turned toward me, and gave a shallow bow. Urged on by Matthew, Tina mimicked his actions. "Mia, we take back all the rude things we said earlier. We're truly sorry." "Come on, Tina, apologize too." "I'm sorry." Although they said the words, neither of them seemed to mean it. Tina's face clearly showed her thoughts. "Why do I have to apologize? You don't really feel sorry, do you, Mom and Dad?" Christopher, just like me, sensed their insincerity. "That's right. It seems to me that they're only apologizing because they're afraid of being abandoned by their son. Maybe it's time for you to distance yourself from parents like these." "Christopher, what? How could you say something so cruel?" "Hey, Tina, don't say anything unnecessary." Matthew hurriedly tried to cover Tina's mouth, but it was too late. It was clear they weren't sincerely apologizing. "I guess that settles it. From now on, Matthew, you and Tina will need to live on your own. That being the case, you should cancel your French restaurant reservation and go home to talk about your future. You can't afford to indulge yourselves anymore." "Right. Oh, and if you'd like, I'd be honored to join the CEO's family for that French dinner tonight. As a token of my apology and gratitude, I'd like to treat you all." As Christopher and our family enjoyed a pleasant conversation, Matthew and Tina watched with resentful eyes. Then Alexander added to the situation. "By the way, your husband's poor work performance is well known not just in our partner companies, but across the entire region. So finding a new job with similar conditions to his previous one might be tough." What? No way. Matt, what are we going to do now? Tina yelled at Matthew, slapping him hard on the head. Matthew, unable to respond, hung his head in silence, sweating profusely. Tina continued to slap him, hurling abuse at him as she did so. Leaving the two of them behind, we walked away. After that, Matthew and Tina were forced to make a living with only part-time jobs. Just as Alexander had predicted, no matter where Matthew applied, he never even got a call back. I learned about that about a month after our last encounter. Matthew and Tina realized that their son was no longer going to listen to them, and for some reason, they began showing up at Zane's office repeatedly. They would time their visits to catch Zane when Christopher was out on business, and they'd come directly to the CEO's office. "Mr. Prescott, please, we beg you. Could you talk to Christopher and ask him to come back to us? Without our son, my wife and I won't be able to survive." Matthew, on his knees, pleading tearfully. No matter how kind-hearted Zane was, there was no way he would accept such a request. Matthew and Tina were the kind of people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. I watched their behavior from the accounting office and knew I had to do something. After consulting with Alexander, we decided to have him wait in Zane's CEO office during the usual time that Matthew and Tina would come to visit. So as usual, when the two of them showed up before Zane, Alexander stepped in front of them. Matthew looked startled to see Alexander suddenly appear. What are you doing here? I heard that you've been persistently coming to Zane. Something about asking your son to come back. Well, since he's clearly against it, that's impossible, no matter what you do." Matthew and Tina exchanged a troubled glance. Alexander continued speaking to them. "I think it's time you give up on your son. Mr. Garcia, I contacted your parents. Since they're ex-in-laws to Mia, we had their contact information. I explained the situation to them, and they said they would take you back in. Congratulations, at least you won't have to worry about making ends meet." Alexander's words left Matthew and Tina pale-faced. "That's not funny. My parents are tough to deal with. Their home is in a remote, inconvenient place. It's no place to live. That's right. And they adored Mia. They hate me. There's no way I could live with them." Seeing their panic, Alexander let out a chuckle. "Oh, is that so? Well, I've heard you can't pay rent and have to leave your apartment by the end of this month. You know that apartment is managed by us." Alexander's words hit them like a punch, leaving them stunned. I couldn't help but stifle a laugh as I watched from the accounting room next door. Serves them right, I thought to myself. Afterward, Tina insisted she couldn't bear the idea of living with Matthew's parents, and the two divorced. But since Tina's affair and remarriage were well known, she couldn't turn to her own parents for help either. Now I occasionally see her in the neighborhood, looking gaunt as she goes in and out of the job center, having been a housewife ever since marrying Matthew, and with a difficult personality to boot. It's no wonder she struggles to find anyone willing to hire her. As for Matthew, with no other options, he was forced to go back to his parents' home, where he seems to be feeling quite uncomfortable. Apparently, Matthew's relationship with his parents had always been strained. To his parents, it must have seemed that he had finally settled down by getting married, only to divorce because of an affair. Then when he split up with his second spouse, they must have felt like they were stuck taking care of a son they would have rather left to fend for himself. Every now and then, Christopher gets messages from Matthew or Tina on his smartphone, so I hear updates about their situation. From what I hear, Matthew, a man in his 50s, living with his parents in their 80s, working a small part-time job, has become the subject of gossip in his hometown, and people whisper about his financial dependency. Feeling too embarrassed to be seen in public, Matthew sneaked away from his parents' house and reached out to Tina. They tried to get back together, but being as irresponsible as ever, they both soon found themselves in even deeper financial trouble. Eventually, they had to cancel their smartphone contracts, and Christopher lost contact with them. But I happened to see their new situation myself. One night, on my usual way home from shopping, I saw them fighting over garbage with a raccoon in an alley. I even saw them living in a cardboard box they set up in a park nearby. No one is willing to hire Matthew. And Tina is not cut out for work. They've really hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, we've continued to work hard every day, as always. Zane's company has continued to grow, with new hires like Christopher and friends from his college days, and even more new employees joining recently. The atmosphere in the office is warm and welcoming, and everyone feels like part of a family. Although Christopher has completely cut ties with his parents, my husband and I have become like parents to him. On weekends, we invite Christopher over to our home, where we eat meals together, drink, and have a great time. One day, Alexander made a suggestion. "Christopher, you're practically family to us now. So how about we make it official and adopt you?" Christopher looked a little surprised at first, but Zane, who was listening, immediately beamed with excitement. "I'm all for it. I've always wanted an older brother, being an only child, and all. Come on, what do you say? Chris, my big bro." "What? Big bro? Are you sure you mean it?" Christopher asked us cautiously, trying to gauge if we were serious. Alexander and I exchanged a smile and nodded. "Of course. You're not alone anymore, Chris. You're a precious part of our family, so you don't need to hold back." Hearing this, Christopher's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. From now on, please take care of me." Born into a tough situation, Christopher didn't let it defeat him, and he grew into a truly wonderful, honest person. From now on, we will walk together as a family, sharing happy days, because that's what will make Christopher's life truly fulfilling.
It's clear as day. The inheritance is all going to the eldest son. The will is legit. I hope you're satisfied now. You are doubting it, you damn dater-in-law. What? Even though our father-in-law had so much money, is it okay to take it all? My husband looked down on me while his dater-in-law rejoiced. The $10 million inheritance from our father will all go to my brother. I stared at the will in despair. Have I lost everything, bound to this wretched man forever? But with just one sentence from my brother, everything changed. My name is Emily. I'm a 55-year-old housewife. I don't have any children with my husband, Liam. We live alone. In one word, my husband is a classic tyrant. Since the beginning of our marriage, I was always expected to obey him. I could never challenge or voice my opinion against him. My husband, who is 10 years older, never showed any consideration for me. I was treated like a servant, harshly insulted if anything displeased him, even after I tried my best doing housework. I was blamed continuously for not being able to bear children. I would often hide and cry. I wanted to divorce him, but I didn't want to worry my family, and I didn't have the financial capability to support myself. Under the tyranny of my arrogant and abusive husband, I clenched my teeth and endured. My only mental support was my father. He was a highly competent businessman. He built a company from scratch and developed it into a large corporation. He was a workaholic, but he loved my brother and me in his own way. After my mother passed away in a car accident shortly after my marriage, he threw himself into his work even more to suppress his loneliness. Perhaps his overworking led to his downfall. He had a stroke and was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, he survived, but he was left paralyzed on the left side. As a result of working so strenuously, he had accumulated a substantial amount of wealth. I convinced my father to retire. Worried about him living alone, I somehow convinced my husband, and we moved into my father's house. Once a workaholic, he aged dramatically after retirement. He started showing signs of dementia and quickly became bedridden and in need of care. My physical and mental burden increased significantly. In addition to the usual housework and taking care of my husband, I now had to care for my father with dementia. My father would sometimes be quiet, But he would also yell and cause a commotion at night, or wander out of the house. I was constantly exhausted from stress, sleep deprivation, and endless labor. My father was often hazy, but there were moments when he was clear-minded. During those times, we could have peaceful conversations like old times. He would often thank me and say, with a sad smile, "I want to leave you as much as I can." Then, my father passed away. It was 3 years after I started caring for him. I was relieved from the burden of care, but losing my only emotional support left me overwhelmed with grief and loneliness. My only hope was my father's inheritance. Even if my brother and I split the $10 million inheritance, it would still be $5 million each. With that money, I could finally get away from that demonic husband. It was the only hope left in my life. A few days later, I was called in by my husband and Natalie, my brother's wife, about the inheritance. My brother, Natalie's husband, had been working abroad alone for several years. He came back temporarily for the funeral, but he returned to his post just yesterday. As a stand-in for the eldest son, his wife, Natalie, would be attending. "My father-in-law's will has been found deep in a drawer," she said. "I'm glad it was prepared. The envelope wasn't even sealed, so let's take a look right away." A will? Did something like that exist? Despite providing daily, dedicated care to him, I never saw my father writing a will. I found it peculiar that my husband, who barely got near my father, let alone care for him, knew about this. A feeling of unease rose in me. I had a bad premonition. "All right, I'm going to read it now. All of my assets are to be inherited by my eldest son, Mason. Signed, Steve." That's all. I couldn't believe my ears. I had always assumed my father's inheritance would be evenly split between my brother and me. The entire inheritance of $10 million would go to my brother. "Wait a minute. That's not right. Why?" In my confusion, my husband thrust the will towards me. "See for yourself." Sure enough, it was written just as he said, alongside my father's signature. I immediately suspected that the will was a forgery. My father had a good relationship with both my brother and me, and wasn't the kind of person to favor only one of us. But would my kind and straightforward brother really monopolize the inheritance for himself? While I was pondering in paranoia, the eldest son's wife raised her voice in glee. "Wow. Even though father-in-law had so much money, is it really okay to take it all? I feel a bit bad, but if that's his will, we must respect it." This was impossible to accept. While I sat silent, holding the will, my husband and the eldest son's wife glared at me. "Hey, don't tell me you're doubting this." "Fine, then bring in a handwriting expert or whatever. You're just upset because it doesn't work out in your favor. You're such a bad character." "I will do that," I murmured, deciding to request an evaluation of the will. But the results were contrary to my expectation, declaring it was undoubtedly written by the deceased himself. Upon hearing the shocking result, I was crestfallen, recalling the days gone by in sadness. I had dedicated my life to looking after my husband and father. The days of living in fear of my husband's anger, getting hurt by his harsh words, being called a worthless woman, were tough. But my last days with my father were happy. And I had believed that my father truly cared for me. The shock of feeling ignored by my beloved father was unbearable, more so than not receiving the inheritance. I'd probably have to leave the house and land I'm so used to, as they're part of my father's real estate inheritance. The divorce from my husband that I had dreamt about now seemed like a distant dream. One weekend, I shared the results of the will's evaluation with my husband at home. With a smug look on his face, he laughed at me. "It's clear now, all the inheritance belongs to the eldest son. Don't meddle anymore. You should be satisfied now, since the will was genuine. Distrusting which, he sneered before leaving the house. Recently, my husband has been out of the house more frequently. He's been coming home late from work. And like today, he's often away on his off days. I found it suspicious, but I didn't want to see him more than necessary, so in a way, I felt relieved. Though my husband told me not to, I wanted to discuss the matter of the inheritance directly with my brother. My brother, who works overseas, is always busy, but he's a kind and reliable person. After checking with him about his availability, skipping the pleasantries, my older brother apologized for leaving our father's care to me, and thanked me for handling the funeral and the various procedures. Don't worry about it. So, about our father's inheritance. Was it always decided that you alone would inherit everything? I tried asking in as casual a tone as possible. It was heart-wrenching to think that our father might not have loved me, but I wanted to have this conversation. What? What do you mean I'm inheriting everything? My brother was shocked. I had assumed that Natalie had already filled him in, but this was news to him. However, the will was authentic, and the outcome would likely remain the same. I explained the situation to my brother. I see. So the handwriting on the will was Dad's, and that was the only content? Okay, I need some time to think. I'll get back to you. Don't proceed with the inheritance process until you hear from me. I'll let Natalie know. With that, my brother hung up. I waited for his call, intrigued by the situation. A few days later, my brother got back to me. He suspected that his wife, Natalie, was up to something and wanted me to hire a private investigator. He also advised me to make a claim for a reserved portion from him. A reserved portion is a part of the inheritance that's guaranteed to the legal heirs, with the amount set according to their position. In my case, I could claim $2,500,000 out of my father's $10 million inheritance. Even with the will stating, everything will be inherited by my eldest son alone, I would still be able to inherit $2,500,000 using this provision. However, my husband and eldest son's wife fiercely opposed this. We've already settled this. Don't make a fuss now. But my brother's advice didn't stop there. I'm not asking for $2,500,000. All I want is this house, filled with memories of our father, and the land. The real estate is worth only $1 million out of the total $10 million inheritance. I'll leave the rest to my elder brother. Despite their objections, I continued. If things get more complicated, my brother has suggested I hire a lawyer to join the discussion. If that happens, I'll end up inheriting the full $2,500,000. My husband and eldest son's wife fell silent. They seemed to realize that settling for $1 million in real estate was more advantageous. So, we finally reached an agreement on the distribution of the inheritance. A few days later, I received the investigation report on Natalie, which I had commissioned. I immediately contacted my brother. After a series of twists and turns, we successfully completed the procedures for our father's inheritance. My brother, Mason, even flew in from abroad to join the proceedings. I inherited the house and land, worth $1 million, while my older brother inherited the remaining $9 million. Natalie, my brother's wife, and my husband were both thrilled as everything had gone according to their plans. After leaving the lawyer's office, where we had finalized the inheritance proceedings, the four of us returned to our father's house. As we sat in the living room enjoying some tea, my brother put his phone on the table and started talking. Good job, everyone! Now that the inheritance proceedings are over, I have something to discuss. With a smile, My brother pulled out a document from his pocket and spread it on the table. My husband and Natalie's faces froze when they saw the contents. Last Will and Testament. That's what the title of the document said. At the end, there was my father's signature and official seal. The date on it was about 5 years ago. This is the will my father entrusted to me when he was still active. It's a legally valid will, created with 2 witnesses at a notary office. He explained that our father had drafted it himself before he had a stroke. His wife had already passed away, and he wanted to ensure his children inherited his wealth should anything happen to him. The will specified that Mason, who already has substantial assets, will inherit 1/4 of the estate, and Emily, a homemaker, will inherit 3/4. My father had stated that he had no intention of changing the contents of the will, and had explicitly written, "If any changes are to be made to this will, the reason for the change must be stated. Any will with changes not accompanied by a reason will be deemed invalid." Father was overworking himself due to his job. I think he considered various possibilities, like falling ill and becoming vegetative or suffering from dementia. Because the amount of his assets was enormous, he prepared early to prevent any disputes among the remaining family members after he was gone. My brother said as he patted the will. The will had a supplemental section that said, "I wish for all of you to live happily together, without any conflicts over the inheritance." It was a will filled with our father's warm feelings for his family. Learning that I, like my brother, had been loved by my father warmed my heart. On the other hand, the faces of my husband and my eldest son's wife sitting next to me had turned pale. So, if this will is to be changed, it's completely invalid unless the reason is stated. Even if it is in father's handwriting. He might have been forced to write it when he was in a state of dementia. Suddenly, my husband slammed the table. Looked at my brother with a face like a demon, he growled. "Mason, do you have any proof?" Accusing people of being criminals. I never said Liam forged the will, did I? He looked at Natalie, the eldest son's wife, sitting next to him. Natalie remained silent. It was strange. Natalie informed me about father's death, and I was in Japan until the funeral. After I returned overseas, apparently discussions about the inheritance took place. Despite the matter involving me, there was no communication about it. He looked at Natalie, his wife. Natalie still said nothing. "Enough with your nonsense. The inheritance has already been settled. The $9 million is ours. What does it matter now?" Who do you mean by US? I am the one who inherited. My brother responded. "Enough!" My husband yelled. The conversation wasn't going anywhere. I don't quite understand, but the $9 million I inherited is nothing more than a worthless piece of paper, my brother stated. Huh? My husband looked puzzled. My brother explained calmly. Father's $10 million estate. Other than the real estate, all the assets were stocks in my father's own company. When he was the manager, the company was doing well and the stock prices were soaring. However, after his resignation, the company had been in the red and was on the brink of bankruptcy 3 years before his death. What used to be a wealth valued over $9 million was now nothing more than worthless paper. There's no way that's possible. It's true. I inherited it knowing full well. I plan to sort out the debts of father's company from now on. The husband was agitated, cradling his head and murmuring to himself. He seemed unable to accept the reality that was suddenly before him. This was when Natalie spoke up for the first time. "Hold on, just wait a minute. So what? I inherited trash without knowing it, and Emily alone inherited $1 million? That's not fair. It's unfair. Next to Natalie, who was in a fit of rage, her brother sighed. Natalie, I inherited my father's estate. It doesn't disadvantage you. Is it something to get so angry about? But I thought we were going to get the whole $10 million. I was. Natalie, who was flustered and stumbling over her words, was sharply glared at by her husband, Liam. So, you conspired with Liam and had an affair because you thought you were going to get all of Dad's money. Natalie and her husband fell silent as if they were frozen. Why? Natalie murmured in a hoarse voice. Glancing at her, the brother continued. After his phone call with me, he said he began to suspect his wife, Natalie. Why didn't she tell him about the inheritance? Why had her interactions with him become curt recently, and why was she ignoring his messages? As he was suspecting, he saw Natalie's social media post and became convinced of her affair. Soon I'm going to come into a huge amount of money. I'm going to be a celebrity darling and I are discussing how to spend it. He said we'll have lots of fun when the money comes in. I'm so happy. I don't recall having that kind of conversation with you. I wonder who this darling is. No, that's not it. This is different. Ignoring his flustered wife, the brother took out a large envelope. He pulled out several photos and lined them up next to the will. They showed Natalie and Liam arm in arm, entering a hotel. The close relationship between the two of them was obvious. I was overseas, you see. I had a detective agency investigate. I was curious about your darling. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Natalie was trembling. Looking at Natalie's adulterous husband, he was boiling with rage, as red as a boiled octopus, in contrast to Natalie, who had turned pale. Sneaking around like a stalker. What's your game? Bringing out this nonsense will in pictures. This is all. Wait. Suddenly, Natalie raised her voice. She sidled up to her brother with her wheedling voice. You've got it all wrong. It was all Liam's doing. He said that if I did as he said, we'd get all of our father-in-law's assets. I was manipulated too. Wouldn't you be happy to get $10 million? I did it for you. Her husband, who had been betrayed so easily, was gaping at Natalie. These photos, we were just having a little fun. You were always overseas and I was lonely. Can you blame me? You're partly responsible too, right? Please forgive me. We lost the $9 million, but let's take Emily's $1 million worth of real estate. Did you forge the will? Huh? Of course not. Liam did it. He said it was easy and made our father-in-law write it. See, I didn't do anything wrong. When the matter of forging the will was also exposed, the husband flew into a rage and lunged at Natalie, but the brother quickly intervened. You bunch of bastards! You don't have any evidence. I'll make sure all of you regret it in the next life. With a cool gaze, the brother watched the husband angrily kicking chairs about. He nonchalantly picked up his phone. Well, it seems my phone was on recording mode without me noticing. It appears to have been recording since the moment I walked into the house. Quite a careless move on my part. The husband and Natalie went silent, their faces paling. Also, didn't mention this earlier, but we have surveillance cameras in this room. They've been recording everything. Installed them because Dad's dementia was severe. We wanted to keep an eye on him just in case. Quite the coincidence, right? In the quiet living room, the brother continued his monologue. The forgery of the will, that falls under penal law, forgery of a document with a seal. Those harsh words you directed at us just now, that's intimidation under penal law. There's a police station nearby, they'd come right away if we called. But well, the inheritance issue is resolved, and if you swear not to meddle with Emily's share in the future, maybe there's no need to report this. What do you think? As he spoke, he said, "I'll send this voice recording to my computer abroad, it'd be a shame to waste it," and began operating his phone. I had been quietly observing their exchange until now, but I pulled out some documents from my bag and thrust them towards my husband. Let's get a divorce. Right here, right now. I spread out the completed divorce application, a pen, and my husband's personal seal on the table. Hey, wait, think about this, all right? I apologize. We've been together for so long, we've had good times, right? Who do you think has been providing for you? That's enough. Quit your blabbering and sign this. I'll report you. With a fierce expression, I gripped my phone. Resigned, my husband dropped his shoulders and signed the divorce papers. Natalie. It's over for us too. Once I had the money, you planned to take it and be with Liam, didn't you? I had a detective agency let me listen to the records of your conversations with Liam. Natalie hung her head, covering her face. After that, my brother and I divorced. The husband, after the divorce, left the house. The inheritance he thought he had gained was not only worthless, but he was exposed for the will forgery by Natalie, and everything that happened in the living room was recorded. He must have been boiling with rage, but there was nothing he could do about it. The surveillance camera in the living room was indeed installed for taking care of my father, but it also served the purpose of collecting evidence of my husband's emotional abuse. If my husband refused to divorce after gaining the inheritance, and it caused a dispute, I planned to present it as evidence in the divorce trial. When I discussed this with my brother, he suggested that we could make use of that camera as well. After the divorce, it seems rumors of his affair spread at work, and he lost his place there and resigned. It seems his colleague saw him entering and exiting a hotel with a family member who wasn't his wife. His parents had already passed away, and now that he had lost his home and job, he's nowhere to be found. I had asked for compensation in the divorce trial, but I didn't want anything to do with Liam anymore, and since I had received the inheritance, I didn't care. Natalie, Liam's affair partner, also lost everything because of the incident, just like Liam. Until the end of her divorce with my brother, she persistently pleaded, "I don't want to break up. Don't leave me." But the divorce was finalized when irrefutable evidence was presented in mediation. Compensation was also claimed from Natalie in the divorce trial, but she had spent a lot of money while her husband was absent, so that was claimed as well, leaving her completely penniless. Without a job or a home to return to, just like Liam, he seems to be eking out a living in a rundown public housing unit, subsisting on welfare. My brother is still stationed abroad, and he's put up the house where Natalie and he used to live for sale. He's decided to live with me in the house that our father left us. I was living modestly, but with my brother contributing to living expenses, life has become stable. The value of the land our father left us has been rising annually, and now it's easily worth over $10 million. Freed from the duties of caring for my father and enduring my husband's emotional abuse, I'm living at ease. Now that I have some time to myself and live alone in this big house, I wondered if there was something useful I could do with it. Around that time, I saw a TV show about exchange students doing home stays and thought, this is it. So, I decided to start renting out my spare rooms. Now, I provide affordable rooms to college students and exchange students, and I live a lively life with them. We eat meals together, play games, help with assignments. It's like we're one big, noisy, happy family. On days when I have some spare time, I also volunteer to read children's books at the local public library. I don't have any children of my own, and my heart had drifted apart from my husband. I had always feared how lonely I'd feel if I lost my beloved father on top of all this, but now, my days are incredibly lively and filled with vitality. I can't tell you how happy it makes me to connect with young people at this age and feel that I'm contributing, even a little, to society. There were many times when I wanted to run away from my own life because things got so hard. But now, I'm loosely connected with my brother, my roommates, and the people in my community, and I'm living fulfilling days. I savor the simple happiness that I've finally attained every single day.